Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson. Hi, I'm Bill Bryson. There are certain idiosyncratic notions that you quietly come to accept when you live for a long time in Britain. One is that British summers used to be longer and sunnier. Another is that the England soccer team shouldn't have any trouble with Norway. A third is the idea that Britain is a big place. This last is easily the most intractable. If you mention in the pub that you intend to drive from, say, Surrey to Cornwall, a distance that most Americans would happily go to get a taco, your companions will puff their cheeks, look knowingly at each other, and blow out air as if to say, "Well, now that's a bit of a tall order." And then they'll launch into a lively and protracted discussion of whether it's better to take the A30 to Stockbridge and then the A303 to Ilchester, or the A361 to Glastonbury via Shepton Mallet. Within minutes, the conversation will plunge off into a level of detail that leaves you, as a foreigner, swivelling your head in quiet wonderment. "You know that lay-by outside Warminster, the one with the grit box with the broken handle," one of them will say. "You know, just past the turn-off for Little Puking, but before the B6029 mini roundabout." At this point you find you are the only person in the group not nodding vigorously. "Well, about a quarter of a mile past there, not the first left turning, but the second one, there's a lane between two hedgerows. They're mostly hawthorn, but with a little hazel mixed in. Well, if you follow that road past the reservoir and under the railway bridge and take a sharp right at the Buggered Ploughman—" "Nice little pub," somebody will interject. Usually, for some reason, a guy in a bulky cardigan. They do a decent pint of old toe jam. "And follow the dirt track through the Army firing range and around the back of the cement works. It drops down onto the B3689 Ramsdropping bypass. It saves a good 3 or 4 minutes and cuts out the rail crossing at Great Shagging. Unless, of course, you're coming from Crewkerne," somebody else will add knowledgeably. "Now, if you're coming from Crewkerne, give 2 or more men in a pub the names of any 2 places in Britain and they can happily fill hours. Wherever it is you want to go, the consensus is generally that it's just about possible as long as you scrupulously avoid Oakhampton, the North Circular in London, and the Severn Bridge westbound between the hours of 3 p.m. on Friday and 10 a.m. on Monday, except bank holidays when you shouldn't go anywhere at all. Me, I don't even walk to the corner shop on bank holidays," some little guy on the margins will chirp up proudly, as if by staying at home in Clapham he has for years cannily avoided a notorious bottleneck at Scotch Corner. Eventually, when the intricacies of B-roads, contraflow black spots, and good places to get a bacon sandwich have been discussed so thoroughly that your ears have begun to seep blood, one member of the party will turn to you and idly ask over a sip of beer when you were thinking of setting off. When this happens, you must never answer truthfully and say, in that dopey kind of way of yours, "Oh, I don't know, about 10, I suppose," because they'll all be off again. 10 o'clock, one of them will say, and try to back his head off his shoulders. As in 10 o'clock a.m., he'll make a face. "Well, it's entirely up to you, of course, but personally, if I was planning to be in Cornwall by 3 o'clock tomorrow, I'd have left yesterday." "Yesterday," someone else will say, chortling softly at this misplaced optimism. "I think you're forgetting, Colin, that it's half-term for schools in North Wiltshire and West Somerset this week. It'll be murder between Swindon and Warminster. No, you wouldn't have left a week last Tuesday. And there's the Great West Steam Rally and tractor pull at Little Dribbling this weekend," somebody from across the room will add, strolling over to join you because it's always pleasant to bring bad motoring news. "There'll be 375,000 cars all converging on the Little Chef roundabout at Upton Dupton. We once spent 11 days in a tailback there, and that was just to get out of the car park. No, you want to have left when you were still in your mother's womb, or preferably while you were spermatozoa, and even then you won't find a parking space beyond Bodmin. Once, when I was younger, I took all these alarming warnings to heart. I went home, reset the alarm clock, roused the family at 4 to protests and general consternation, and had everyone bundled and into the car and on the road by 5. As a result, we were in Newquay in time for breakfast and had to wait around for 7 hours before the holiday park would let us have one of its wretched chalets. And the worst of it was that I'd only agreed to go there because I thought the town was called Newquay, and I wanted to stock up on postcards. The fact is that the British have a totally private sense of distance. This is most visibly seen in the shared pretense that Britain is a lonely island in the middle of an empty green sea. Of course, the British are all aware, in an abstract sort of way, that there is a substantial landmass called Europe nearby, and that from time to time it's necessary to go over there to give old Jerry a drubbing or have a holiday in the sun. But it's not nearby in any meaningful sense in the way that, say, Disney World is. If your concept of world geography was shaped entirely by the content of British newspapers and television, you would conclude that America must be about where Ireland is, that France and Germany lie roughly alongside the Azores, that Australia occupies a hot zone somewhere in the region of the Middle East, and that pretty much all the other sovereign states are either mythical, e.g. Burundi, El Salvador, Mongolia, and Bhutan, or can only be reached by spaceship. Consider the acres of news space in Britain devoted to marginal American figures like Oliver North, Lorena Bobbitt, and O.J. Simpson, and compare that with all the news reported in any year from Scandinavia, Austria, Switzerland, Greece, Portugal, and Spain, and you will see what I mean. It's crazy, really. If there's a political crisis in Italy or a nuclear spill in Karlsruhe, it gets maybe 8 inches on an inside page. But if some woman in shit-kicker West Virginia cuts off her husband's dick and flings it out the window in a fit of pique, it's second lead on the 9 o'clock news, and the Sunday Times is mobilizing its investigative unit. You figure it. I can remember, when I first moved to Bournemouth, on England's south coast, fiddling with the car radio and being astounded at how many of the stations it picked up were in French, then consulting an atlas and being no less astounded to realize that I was closer to Cherbourg than I was to London. I mentioned this at work the next day, and most of my colleagues refused to believe it. Even when I showed them on a map, they frowned doubtfully and said things like, well, yes, it may be closer in a strict physical sense, as if I were splitting hairs, and that really a whole new concept of distance was required once you waded into the English Channel. And of course, to that extent, they were right. Even now, I am frequently dumbfounded to realize that you can get on an airplane in London, and in less time than it takes to get the foil lid off the little container of milk for your coffee, and its contents distributed all over yourself and the man next to you. And it's amazing, isn't it, how much milk one of those little tubs holds. You're in Brussels or Paris, and everyone looks like Yves Montand or Jean Moreau. All this is a roundabout way of explaining how it was that I came to be standing, one bright, clear autumn afternoon in my 44th year, on a dirty beach at Calais, staring across the English Channel to an outcrop on the horizon that was clearly and sunnily the white cliffs of Dover, and experiencing something of the same sense of wonder. I had come to Calais because I was about to embark on a grand tour of Britain, and wanted to re-enter the country as I had first seen it, from the sea. After nearly 20 years in England, my wife and I had taken the decision to move back to America for a while, to give the children the chance of experiencing life in another country, and my wife the chance to shop until 10 p.m. 7 nights a week. I'd recently read that 3.7 million Americans, according to a Gallup poll, believed that they had been abducted by aliens at one time or another, so it was clear that my people needed me. But I had insisted on having one last look at Britain, a kind of valedictory tour around the green and kindly island that had for 2 decades been my home. I knew, in a theoretical sort of way, that England was only a spit over 20 miles off, but I couldn't quite believe that I could stand there, on this sunny French beach, and actually see it. Well, fancy, I murmured, and almost immediately fell into one of those reveries that are traditionally depicted on television by bringing up the music and making the screen go wavy. I was remembering my first sight of England more than 20 years before. It was a foggy March night in 1973 when I arrived in Dover on the midnight ferry from Calais, having walked and hitchhiked from Luxembourg, where I had disembarked 3 days earlier from an Icelandic Airlines jet from New York. It was my first time away from home, my first experience.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?